Well, good morning, everybody. So as was noted, my name's Stephen Munn, and I'm a long-time member of this church. I'm not a pastor or an elder, but I guess if you get old enough, you get to stand up here occasionally. So I'm going to be talking about the family today, and the Bible has a lot to say about how central the human family is in the framework of society, and my wife Glenys, who's sitting there, and I firmly believe that we need to get marriages and family relationships right. Now, we want to say right at the outset that we don't always do that. We still struggle to overcome differences in our marriage, and we've been married for 49 years. We often fail to speak well across the generations, and perhaps there's a reason for that. We have 6 children spanning 15 years. We have 10 grandchildren spanning 12 years, and that means having to say sorry quite a lot. With all those kids and grandkids, that's a lot of photos, social media posts, and memes under the bridge. In addition, sitting up the back there is my 92-year-old mother-in-law, Nola, and she lives with us. So that's 4 generations of potential misunderstandings to deal with. I was asked to give this talk at family camp last year, the church camp, in October, and that was an abbreviated version of what I'm going to talk about today. I hope to be able to get into it in a little bit more depth. Now, I'll turn this on. Yeah, I hope. And move it forward. I might need help with that. You change the slide, that's good, thanks. I'll get you to change the slides, actually, if that's all right. So I'm going to divide this talk into 3 bits. The first one is about the evidence for the power of human families. Second bit is what the Bible has to say about families, and the third bit is about the church as family. I've called it the Latin phrase in loco parentis, which really means in place of the parents or in place of the family. And I'm a firm believer that the church, especially in the 21st century, is an important surrogate family for many people, and we'll dwell on that quite a bit. Next slide, please. So, trying to get to track the time course of the place of human families in ancient societies not easy, because we didn't have books or recordings of all of these things, but 4,600-year-old skeletal remains were found in Ulo, Germany, and you can see those bones in the top part of this slide. In the bottom part of the slide, they've recreated what the bodies would have looked like sitting in there. There were 2 adults and 2 children. They're entwined together in the grave, and they can extract DNA from the bones of those skeletons, and they can determine that indeed those 2 adults were the parents of those children. What tragedy resulted in them all being in the grave together, we don't know. But at least 4,600 years ago, people were living in families. And there are much older cave paintings showing adults and children dating back much further in time. The patriarchal narratives that we have in the Old Testament are of a similar vintage to this 4,600-year-old family from Germany. And so the patriarchs were living in families, and indeed they had the creation ordinance to guide them. And that, if you remember, is therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That's in Genesis 2. Next slide, please. So, families are a central unit in society. and there's no doubt about their influence. There are studies from very reputable institutions around the world, like Harvard University, the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control, the Brookings Institution, the Pew Research Centre, and even our own Dunedin study, which is under the auspices of the University of Otago. It's now into its 56th year. It says something that I actually helped participate in that study when I was a medical student. So it's very old. But all of those institutions, and in particular that longitudinal study coming from the University of Otago, show that the educational, economic, behavioural, physical and mental health outcomes are all better for children that are raised in stable, low conflict homes where there are two parents. That speaks for itself, really. And these data, while they confirm the benefits of a two-parent family, they don't denigrate the single-parent families that have produced really wonderful, well-adapted children that go on to be successful. It just turns out that it's a lot easier to do that if you have two parents, provided, of course, those two parents can get along with each other. The Dunedin study also showed, because it's now into the second generation, it also showed that two-parent families are becoming increasingly uncommon. Next slide, please. And one of the most obvious things is that if you don't have a stable marriage, it's difficult to have a stable family. And unfortunately, you can see that marriage as a whole is becoming a lot less common in New Zealand. That graph shows the marriage rate in our society over time, and it's been steadily falling. And even then, of the marriages that do take place, 1 in 3 of those will fail by the 25th anniversary. Next slide. So, while the traditional two-parent family is perhaps on the decline, the power and agency of families is not really in doubt. I mean, if you just think about this past week in the news, by politicians from both sides of Parliament were agreeing amongst themselves that children need to be protected from the brutalities of media wars or be used as political pawns. There's a consensus that the family is more important than warring factions within Parliament. And indeed, we are asked to consider the input of family and family values for a whole list of things like legislative change, urban development, traffic configuration, access to parks and reserves, public transport, social welfare benefits, all the way to victim impact reports in the judiciary. So families have a powerful influence within our society, no matter what shape they might take. Next slide, please. Now, don't laugh too much. So I had a personal experience of the power of the family some years ago when I was a newly minted transplant surgeon at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, fractionally younger looking than now. There was a young woman in her 30s who had been admitted with acute liver failure. Now, you may not know what that is, but that's a condition often caused by a viral infection or autoimmune destruction of the liver, and when it occurs in such a young person, and there's evidence that the entire liver is failing, and by that we mean it's not making any clotting factors, it's not dealing with lactate in the body, so there's a lactic acidosis, there's a very high level of jaundice, and the brain begins to swell. When that happens, we know from experience that the average life expectancy of that type of patient is about 3 days, unless they get a transplant. The patient was the mother of 2 young children, I'm guessing around 3 to 5 years old. And her very concerned husband was sitting by her bedside the entire time. And we listed her for a transplant, and we hoped to get a donor in time. Now, a liver became available from a deceased donor, so I went and spoke to the family, and the patient herself, of course, was comatose, so she couldn't participate, but the family was obviously very excited that here was an opportunity, a chance, in what was otherwise a very dire situation. We took her to the operating room and prepped her for surgery while the liver was being procured. So there's a procurement team out getting the liver, flying in via Learjet, and because of the preservation time, we have to get started on the operation. After the first incision into her abdomen, my heart sank. Her entire abdominal cavity was filled with small bowel content. She had perforated her intestine. She had contaminated the very site that we wanted to put the new liver. And you will remember that the only way we can put a new liver into somebody is by heavily immunosuppressing them so that they won't reject the transplant. The right course of action in that scenario was absolutely clear. I should abandon the transplant on this patient. I should choose another recipient who didn't have those kind of problems. Abandoning the transplant was the right thing to do. Then the nurses drew my attention to the ankle of the patient. Taped to it was a photograph of the patient's family from when they were all happy and smiling, mum, dad, and the kids. Why had that family taped that photograph to that patient's leg? Because they wanted me to understand just what was at stake. They wanted me to see this patient not as a technical procedure, not as a statistic, but as a crucial member of their family. I looked at the photo. I looked at the operating room nurses. I could only see their eyes because they're all wearing masks. I looked at the anaesthetist. The risks associated with going ahead were enormous. Infection, death in the ICU, a wasted liver, remonstrations from my surgical colleagues, but we all nodded. Then let's get to it, I said. The great news is that she had a very straightforward recovery and returned to that lovely family of hers. She will never to this day know how close the call was or how powerful that photo was with all its connotations of family cohesion. Next slide. So the family, even in social science terms, is a powerful platform for the success of children. Whilst a traditional two-parent family might be on the wane, may be seen as a bit anachronistic, this does not detract from its recognised value. As individuals, we're often moved to help families because of the nature of them, the fact that they are a unit, that they are comprised often of small children that are otherwise defenceless. Next slide, please. So what does the Bible have to say about families? Well, from the very creation of the universe onwards, God has stipulated that the foundation of a family is a marriage between one man and one woman. And it was set out in Genesis, very clear terms, and it was repeated by Jesus in Matthew 19. It says in Matthew 19, verses 4 to 9, "At the beginning the Creator made them, male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his mother and father and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let man not separate.'" Now in this passage, Jesus goes on to make it crystal clear that divorce was to be rare and exceptional. And in Genesis, after that creation, God stood back and looked at it, the man and the woman, and he said it was very good. He recognized it as a platform for healthy sexual relations and the resultant children. "Be fruitful and multiply," he said. And I guess we did some of that right. The world's population is now around 8.3 billion and increasing by about 3 people every second. That's another 3, and another 3. The stability of the marital relationship, next slide, please. Yeah. The stability of the marital relationship and thereby the stability of the family is incredibly dependent on the care of husbands and wives for one another. One of the most disruptive things for children in a family is unresolved conflict between unhappy parents. God knew his creation, and so he's left some pretty clear instructions for how the behaviour should be between husbands and wives. So in Ephesians 5, it says that husbands are to love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. Now, in response to that unconditional love, wives are to do what the church does when Jesus asks us to do something. We're to do our best to do it. Wives that recognise the loving and devoted care of their husbands are to do their very best to acquiesce. It's important to say, however, that mutual deference is required here. It says in Ephesians 4, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Turns out that forgiveness is really powerful. Glennis and I run a marriage course, and in that course there's a whole session dedicated to the power of forgiveness. And it's not just theoretical. We still have to practice that regularly. It's very important. Next slide. When you have a stable family, because you've got a stable marriage, then you're in a position to do something that's useful for the children. The responsibilities of parents include education, discipline, provision for physical needs, the avoidance of provocation or discouragement, modelling godly character, and showing care and compassion. And kids, they're not off the hook. The Bible has plenty to say about what they need to do too. It says that they're to honour and respect their parents, to obey them, to listen to them, to care for them in their old age. I'm looking forward to that. I'm almost there. And they're to bring joy rather than grief to their parents. Next slide. So God has a plan for families, and he's made it pretty clear. Depends on strong marriages, excellent relationships between parents and children, and that those relationships require acknowledgement of God's ordained order. And that has to be combined with a lot of love and patience and forgiveness and forbearance. And one of the things I haven't really stressed is that this is not just for the generation of the family that you're dealing with, it's for the next one. One of the things that the Otago University studies show is that the patterns of behaviour in the parents go through to the next generation. Successful children become successful parents. And God's way is a good way. Next slide. C.S. Lewis, the famous author, writer, commentator, was replying to a Mrs. Johnson who wrote him a letter. She was obviously a bit disgruntled. She was writing to him about the drudgery of being a homemaker and the apparent lack of reward. So he acknowledged that while the work would seem like an eternal punishment, like the punishment of Sisyphus. I don't know whether you know your Greek mythology very well, but he's the poor chap in mythology who was doomed to pushing a big rock up a hill every day, and the rock would get to the top and then fall down to the bottom, and he'd have to do it over and over forever. And so that's what it might seem like to a homemaker who's looking after 3 kids under 3 or something. But he reckoned it was a mission that the whole of humankind was directed to supporting. And he said, and I quote, "It is surely in reality the most important work in the world. What do ships, railways, mines, cars, government, etc. exist for, except that people may be fed, warmed and safe in their own homes. We wage war in order to have peace. We work in order to have leisure. We produce food in order to eat it. So your job, Mrs. Johnson, I should say, is the one for whom all others exist. Next slide. So what about the church as a family? Why am I so taken up with this idea? Well, actually, I think it's a biblical idea. And if you have a look at the way that the local church is to be constituted, there are very many similes between an ordinary biological or earthly family and the church family. In 1 Timothy 3, the church is in fact referred to as God's household. And the relationships within the church are to be similar to those in our human families. It says in 1 Timothy 5, "Do not rebuke an old man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity." And the qualifications for a church elder include the fact that a person has the ability to manage their family. Indeed, 1 Timothy 3 says, "He must manage his own family well. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church?" So you see there's a lot of relationship similarities, governance similarities between the local church and our regular families. Next slide. And one of the things about the local church is that it too can be a recipe for success. The overall functions of the church are fellowship, worship, evangelism, teaching, and service. And those activities are designed to make us all more and more like Jesus, to be salt and light in an increasingly angry, lonely, and sad world. The local church is to be a place where, as brothers and sisters, we look after each other. We apologize when we've done wrong, we forgive one another, and we restore one another. Those are all very appropriate things for a family to do. I was a bit taken when I looked up that word restore, because as a medical person, it has medical connotations. The word restore in the Greek is the same word that is used for setting a broken bone, not just making it, putting it loosely, but aligning it properly, setting it well, not causing too much pain when you do that, and making it perfect again. And that's the concept here. It's very normal when somebody does something wrong in a family that we go through that process of apology, forgiveness, and restoration. And the same thing should pertain here in the church. When somebody goes astray, the right approach is not to avoid that person, is not to talk about them behind their back, use the prayer chain as an excuse to gossip about them. It is to forgive them and to restore them. In addition, we have an important duty in relation to individuals who don't have any family, any earthly family. It said in Ephesians 2, "You are no longer strangers and aliens, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. And furthermore, we are to show hospitality to strangers." Hebrews 13. Next slide. And Psalm 68:6 says something about the nature of our Heavenly Father. He's so concerned with people who don't have families that it says that he sets the lonely in families. Such families in this context include the local church. We are the only family that some people have. Next slide. Loneliness is a big problem. A recent book written by Susan Metz called The Loneliness epidemic, notes that about a third of people in Western civilizations describe themselves as lonely. And her concern, I guess we all imagine people as they get older, especially when men die first and women are left on their own, that this is a problem of older people living alone after they've been widowed. But that's not the case. So she points out in her book that the huge growth in loneliness is amongst youth and young adults. Furthermore, I don't know whether you know, but from Statistics New Zealand, it's now apparent that about a quarter of our population live in one-person dwellings. The opportunities for feeling isolated have therefore been compounded. Next slide. So let me tell you a story. It's really a story about how not to do things, but I think it's still instructive. So I want to tell you about Charlie. Charlie was born in the United Kingdom. He came to New Zealand as an adult and he settled in Masterton, my hometown. Charlie was a friendly man, a shearer by occupation, who also enjoyed social football. He came to our local church. He participated in worship. He even taught me in Sunday school. He was a confirmed bachelor, but he seemed happy enough. He often came to our home for Sunday lunch. Charlie was a bit quirky, a little bit odd. He was kind of within the bounds of what was socially acceptable, but he was definitely a little peculiar. He could still manage to get his driver's license. He did a bit of theological study. And his oddness was just a kind of peculiarity. It made us laugh. And on one occasion, for instance, he decided to sell his car to a car dealership to get some money, and very shortly thereafter he bought it back again. And obviously at a much increased price. And we just thought that was kind of humorous, but we didn't think it was deranged. A little bit later, Charlie attempted to go back to the UK to see his mother, who lived in Grimsby. He went by ship, and when he got to Los Angeles, for some reason, he got off, and he was robbed of his passport and his money. He missed the ship, and he stayed in squatters' accommodation in a poorer part of Los Angeles. He was arrested, and he was deported back to New Zealand. When he got back, he was never the same. He called my dad, and he came back to Masterton, and he stayed with some people for about a year. Then he asked to be taken back to Wellington. He went down to Wellington, and he ended up there living on the streets. His mental health must have deteriorated. Next slide, please. Because he was put into Pororua Psychiatric Hospital. It was previously known as the Pororua Lunatic Asylum. He was there for around 2 years before he died at the age of 55. In that 2-year period, he received not a single visitor. When he died, no one attended his funeral. He received a pauper's cremation, and his ashes were scattered. Next slide. It's very reminiscent of a song written by Paul McCartney in 1966 and sung by the Beatles. Eleanor Rigby died in the church and was buried along with her name. Nobody came. Father Mackenzie wiping the dirt from his hands as he walks from the grave. No one was saved. All the lonely people, where do they all come from? Now, I tell you that story because as a church family, we need to do better for Jesus' sake. In Matthew 25, it's very clear what he wants us to do. And I want to read that to you because it's a little bit of a guideline, a list of things that we might do to do better than what we did with Charlie. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. And I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And the righteous answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." Charlie from Grimsby was one of the least of these, and we failed him. We can do better. Next slide. So in broad summary, I've tried to say that human families are really important, but are struggling in this postmodern world. That God's ordained them as important platforms for subsequent generations, and we should follow what he tells us to do. And perhaps the most important take-home message today is that God ordained the church as family, in loco parentis, to provide a place where we might feel safe and loved, a place for the fatherless and the lonely. If you want coherence and cohesion in the 21st century, we should not have to look further than human families and the church family. And I want to leave you with a message from Mother Teresa. Next slide. This is salutary. The greatest suffering is being lonely, feeling unloved, just having no one. That is the worst disease that any human being can ever experience. Let's pray.